I want to move to a wonderful new colleague, Tamara Kayali Browne, who is going to orchestrate and lead the session on Palestinians' perspectives on the future of Palestine. Tamara is a bioethicist, a philosopher of medicine, a senior research fellow at Charles Sturt University. She's received all sorts of awards for teaching, but from our purposes this morning, what is most important is concerns her work for Palestinian human rights. She's a member of the Executive Council of a FOPA, Australian Friends of Palestine Association, a member of the Leadership Committee, the Amnesty International Leadership Committee, in particular, I imagine, with reference to Palestine. I'm thrilled to bits that Tamara is here. She will introduce the distinguished members of her panel. Tamara, that's your cue to get underway.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction, Stuart. So I'm very pleased to be able to chair this session, and it's an important session, but first I actually want to start with a confession. When I first heard the title of this session, my initial thought was, great, another talking shop about pie in the sky. I had become increasingly frustrated with debates about the one state versus two state solution for a number of reasons, some of which I believe our speakers might touch on. But mainly because it can seem like a waste of time when, for all intents and purposes, Israel is proceeding unimpeded with implementing its solution, i.e., genocide and ethnic cleansing on the ground. And sometimes I worry that we spend too much time on discussion and not enough on action. But then I realized it's important when we embark on a journey that we have a destination in mind. If we don't articulate what our goal is, then how can we possibly get there? We on the left are often good at saying what we don't want. We want an end to genocide, we want an end to occupation, we want an end to apartheid. But what do we want to replace it with instead? We say we want a free Palestine, but what exactly do we mean by that? And so, to discuss these important questions, I'm joined today by three speakers. Lama Qasem is a Palestinian activist from Jenin, now based in Canberra, and a board member of the Australian Palestine Advocacy Network. Her political consciousness was shaped during the First Intifada, when she witnessed firsthand the brutality of Israel's occupation. Neighbors beaten in the streets, friends lost to curfews and bullets, uncles imprisoned, and homes repeatedly invaded. By age 11, she was actively involved in the Intifada. Palestine is everything to her, and with the hope of liberation, she pursued a career in engineering to one day rebuild her homeland. Exile brought her to Australia, but her commitment to justice never wavered. In Canberra, Lama has become a community organizer and a strong national voice through her work with APAN. I'm also joined by Mussa Hijazi. He was born in Canberra, and then Mussa returned to Palestine as a child, where he grew up in a small village in the south of Palestine. In 1987, he witnessed the first Palestinian Intifada. He returned to Australia when he was 16. He then later became a lawyer and has practiced exclusively in property and commercial law since 2001. He now practices as a commercial lawyer and partner of Hijazi Curran Cameron Lawyers. Prior to founding Hijazi Curran Cameron Lawyers, Mussa was a partner of a well-respected family and commercial law firm in Canberra. He's attended more than 100 pro-Palestine rallies in the last 2 years, many of which he has led. He has campaigned in the ACT for the ACT government to cut ties with Israel and has faced the reticence of Canberra media to platform Palestinians. I am also joined today by Nahed Elrayes. He is a Gazan writer and composer. He is recognized in Arab America's 30 Under 30 in 2023 and Mianjin's Essays That Changed Australia in 2024. After serving as development manager of UNRWA USA in New York, Nahed has returned to NARM. He recently co-founded Laymoon Arts, a collective dedicated to advancing Arab arts and culture in Australia. I would also like to mention that all of us are Palestinian, so this discussion is not merely theoretical, but a very personal one for us. And so to kick us off, my first question is, what is your vision of an ideal future Palestine? So if you could wave a magic wand, what would it look like to you? And I'll start with Lama.
Thank you so much, Tamara, for this great introduction. And if you allow me, I just want to as well make a bit of a tribute to Amu Ali Qazak. Amu Ali Qazak was not only a friend, he was a mentor. He helped us all keep imagining what the future of Palestine would look like and what when hope was impossible, reminding us that liberation is not only a dream, but a duty of love. His strength, his warmth, his belief in our people touch everybody around him. Amu Ali legacy lives in our hearts, and every moment we dare to believe that freedom is within reach. Thank you so much again. It's an honor for me. I think as Palestinians, when we start talking about the future of Palestine and start imagining how it look like, we should stop talking about borders and solutions that has been imposed to us by Westerners. And I think we should start by our own beliefs and our own, what we call Palestinian tawabit, our red lines as Palestinians, the principles and constants that our people, parties, factions, grassroots groups has all agreed, and it has been for generations on. And those are the right of return, the freedom, the justice, the self-determination on full Palestine, and definitely Jerusalem is our capital and our right to resist. I think in my mind, these are not slogans. These are who we are as Palestinians. These are the guidelines and that has guided us and should guide us through everything. So for me, the future for Palestine is not just basically a flag at the UN or how many states that recognize us and how many countries. I think it's much deeper. It's taking back our agency, our power to shape our own destiny as a people. It's about dignity, about rebuilding our home, about living freely on our land. In this vision, we're all united as people, whether people in Gaza, West Bank, the 1948, people living in refugee camps and in exile as well. We all become one people again, one nation. The political powers come from people and not from foreign donors and elites coming and telling us how we should be rebuilding our politics. It's our politics. It's our people. Our basic rights, the rights of return, the right of freedom, the right of self-determination, are not things that are negotiable. It's our rights, and we want to reclaim them back. Another thing is we want our culture and memory to be live again. It's children are being taught at school the real history and not Western power telling us that we should not be teaching our history. It is our history, and we have to reclaim it back. It's our culture, and it's the basis of everything that we do. And we want to stand in this world with dignity. We're not basically victims waiting for charity. We are a nation that has contributed a lot to this world, and we're contributing a lot to this world, and we want to contribute as Palestinians, not as refugees and immigrants holding passports. We want to contribute with our culture, with our memory, with our knowledge, and with our ideas of freedom and liberation. I think this can all happen when settler colonialism end, not just the walls and the checkpoints, but the mindsets that divides and dehumanize. Yeah, that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Lama. I think that started us off beautifully, really, really beautiful. Nahid, what's your vision?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Stuart, for inviting me to this seminar. Thank you all. Thanks, Tamara, for hosting this, and very honored to be speaking among these distinguished panelists. So, first, I should stress that the Palestinian question has never been about the rights of just a Palestinian state, but the rights of Palestinians, period, as we all would agree. That should be the starting point. Secondly, although the future matters, like Tamara has suggested, we must not, as Tamara suggested, be distracted from the present. So when Indigenous Australians were denied the right to vote, the important question was not how will Australia's future look when Indigenous people are equal to whites? No, the most pressing question was how do we achieve equality now? How do we empower the oppressed people now to shape their own future? And what forces must be confronted today? So likewise, as a disclaimer that we would all agree, we should be wary of any point at which it seems the Palestinians have a burden to propose to Westerners a feasible future in order to win our rights. The burden is on those inhibiting the rights, and they must be held to account. So all of us must pressure Israel to end the occupation, remove the boot from the neck so that a fair future can be envisioned in the first place, that it can be agreed upon without the coercion of structural violence. However, for now, I think Palestinians would agree broadly on the following. We're not interested in a state that is only militarized inwards to police us instead of defend us. We would broadly agree that we're not interested in a flag that we can't raise over our own stolen homes, which thousands of families still have the keys to. And we would agree that we're not interested in any solution, quote unquote, to the world's longest standing refugee problem that demands those same refugees forget the cities and villages they are from, solutions that make our 8-decade genocide permanent. We would all agree that a Palestinian state without those Palestinian rights is a state that has not fully delivered on its purpose to deliver rights to its people. So here's my personal suggestion for an ideal Palestine. It is one where Palestinians live as equals to any other race on earth. It is a state that acknowledges my right to visit my loved ones without walls, without checkpoints, drones, without reducing us to rubble and burnt corpses. One where I can water my grandfather's trees in peace. One where the skies are quiet and our political future is for us to decide, and us alone. Every Palestinian alive deserves a full democratic say in whatever state is exercising sovereignty over every aspect of our lives. We are not demographic threats, as the settler ethos and diseased think tanks posit us to be. A man standing on his own land is not a demographic threat. He is a demographic human. And for us to be politically understood as such is not an ideal future for us, but a necessity, as it has been for all peoples throughout history. Whoever advocates those rights in full is my ally, no matter what they envision on the political level. Doesn't matter if it's one state, if it's no state. As long as we begin with that right-centered framework and we work towards that, anyone in favor of those rights is essentially my ally. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nahid. I think that's really, really poignant. And as you mentioned, I was having some similar thoughts. Mussa, I would love to hear your vision for Palestine as well.
Thank you, Tamara. And just a quick thank you to Pearls Illustrations and Stuart for all your effort in putting this together. I'd like to start, as I always do, with an acknowledgement of that we at least through, I'm not sure where Stuart is, but at least three of us are on unceded Ngunnawal country. We recognise that the land was stolen, always was, and always will be Aboriginal land, and it's not an act of tokenism. It's an important acknowledgement because it shapes the way this country has behaved and continues to behave. The narrative about the lie of terra nullius and the land without a people for a people without land, the parallels are unending, and it's important to recognise this, because for us to expect better from our government and our representatives in relation to Palestine, I don't see how that would occur until this country has reconciled its own history, its own genocide, its own ethnic cleansing. So I start with that. As far as the question itself is concerned, before I go to the question, I also want to just a brief acknowledgement to the late Ali Gazak, and I just wanted to say he and I we didn't see eye to eye on everything, but I was just reminded the other day. I was talking to some friends about we're talking about the rallies. We'd had rallies in Canberra on a weekly basis for almost 100 weeks, and then we're going to break. And there was this conversation about how fatigue had set in, and I think we can all take inspiration from what Ali did for so long. We've had to rally or speak out or do things for the last for 2 years. He pursued this cause unrelentingly for his entire life, and I think we should take inspiration from that and learn that this is a marathon. I've often said it, and others have. It's a marathon, and we can't afford to stop. On the question itself, and I'm sorry, I tend to go on tangents with these things, but on the topic itself, I must admit, as some of you would know, I've spoken at so many rallies and something, and I've never really struggled as much as I did with this. And I couldn't work out why, because Lama jokes all the time about how I talk for a living, so I shouldn't have a problem with this. But for some reason, this was really stumping. And I was sitting there at about midnight last night trying to work out, what am I going to say about this? And I apologize, Tamara, because I know you wanted us to express some views beforehand.
No worries.
And then I realised why. It's because this feeds into this narrative about how this is complicated, right? This is the narrative that's fed to a lot of people, perhaps not so much to us Palestinians, but a lot of people in the West are fed this narrative about how this is complicated. It's not complicated. I mean, saying that we want a right to self-determination, to an undivided homeland, to a place where the refugees are allowed to return, for them to be compensated for reparations for the suffering that they had to face, an independent state that's got a right not to just develop an economy, but also a right to raise an army and defend itself. They all sound like slogans, and it's because they probably are. It's a state whose citizens have the same, as it's already been said, the same rights and entitlements as anyone else in the world. It's not the right to vote, the right for housing, the right for employment, the right for education, the right for healthcare. Like I said, I struggle to come up with a response to this, because to me it's obvious. I don't even know why we need to discuss it. And the reason, and I think part of the reason we need to discuss it, because we continue to be fed this narrative about how this is complicated. It's not complicated. There's an occupation. There's a practice of apartheid. There's been a continuous practice of ethnic cleansing. The genocide started with the Nakba in 1948, and it continues today. So I don't see this as a complicated thing. The occupation needs to end. The apartheid needs to stop. The ethnic cleansing must cease. And the idea that the world stands silent as a genocide continues for 2 years is just mind-boggling. So I suppose in a way what I'm saying is I don't really have an answer for this because I think the answer should be obvious to everybody.
The answer should always be, what was the last word?
The answer should be obvious to anyone.
Yes. Do you think the answer is obvious because we know that we're human beings and we see ourselves as human beings, and that's why it's obvious to us? Then, of course, us as human beings should be allowed to have the same rights as every other human being on Earth. The only reasons why it's complicated to everybody else is it's complicated for the people who don't see us as human beings. And that's why does this resonate at all?
That is such a good point. It is this continuous dehumanization of the Palestinian people for decades that leads us. I mean, even if you, and I don't, people talk about because colonizers have got this ability to decide when history starts, right? And so they've determined recently that history started on the 7th of October, right? But even if you were to accept that, right? Even if you accept that history started on the 7th of October, and then we're told about what happened on the 7th of October, right? Even that was designed to continue the dehumanization of the Palestinians. So basically what happens is, irrespective of, we know a lot more of the facts today than we did at the outset of this about what happened on the 7th of October, right? But there were two important stories, two important lies that had to be told to the world. One was about, because we all have a red line of some sort, and one was about the beheading of children, and the other one was about the mass rapes. Now, the reason those two particular stories were important and they got out there, and even Biden himself, remember when Biden repeated that story about the beheaded children, said he sold photos, and they called the media back in later on and said, actually, no, the president didn't see anything. I mean, we don't know what his cognitive abilities were at the time, but it doesn't matter. That story was already out there, right? And the other one was about it. Now, the reason those stories were run for a significant period of time is because we just saw it. I mean, those of us watching this thing saw what happened after that, because it didn't matter what Israel did from then on. I mean, we're still talking to people today who have no sympathy for the Palestinian people, who don't see us as equal humans, because they actually believe that stuff. Mm. And this is where the media comes in, because they've played a larger role than almost anybody in this, because they spread those lies. And so you would be talking to someone and they'll say, well, what Israel is doing is pretty terrible, but they're dealing with human animals, because we were told that that's where we were. So I think it's an extremely valid point that is the reason why it seems complicated, is because we've been so dehumanized for so long that we have to beg for the rights that anyone else in the world has.
Yeah. And I wondered also whether that might also be at the crux of the question that I keep thinking about when we hear about Trump's 20-point peace plan, or any other peace plan for that matter, or Australia or the UK's conditional support for a Palestinian, conditional recognition for a Palestinian state. Why is it that so many countries don't seem to want to recognize that Palestinians are entitled to the same human rights as every other human being on this planet? In the sense that, like you said, Mussa, if we have a state, why can't it be a state like every other state that has a right to defend itself, that has grants human rights for its citizens, that has sovereignty, etc., etc.? What do you think, Nahed? What's at the crux of how other countries see us?
So I fully agree with Mussa here that what should be advocated for us isn't complicated, but in fairness, maybe where this gets complicated is the tension between the rights that we ought to have and the power dynamics that prevent their implementation. And that's what we're seeing here. And that really is the most pressing question. I have to admit that I'm stumped in many ways there, but I can outline the problem as you've asked, Tamara, which is simply that there is a global hegemon called the United States that has granted unconditional support and impunity to Israel for half a century. And for as long as Israel's impunity isn't challenged in any meaningful way, not just in words, but in sanctions, then frankly, if I was an Israeli, why would I listen to any of the tirades given by the ICJ or the European Parliament when I know that there are no material consequences for anything that I do? So I think that that's a really key element of this, is that there is an imbalance of power and a complete absence of impunity on the Israeli state.
Thank you, Nahed. I think there's so much truth in that. It's complicated when it gets to how are we going to remove the boot from the neck when the boot is so used to being there and there's no need for it to remove its boot up till now. What do you think, Lama? Is there a reason that you think other countries don't see so clearly what we see clearly, which is that we're humans entitled to the same human rights? Why we're not even consulted when it comes to any concerns about our future? What do you think?
I think it's something around what Musa has said. I think the whole Palestinian issue has always been treated like a problem that needs to be managed rather than people needs to be liberated. I think the frameworks that has been put across is basically to end the resistance of the Palestinian people, not rather than ending the injustice. And I think it's all of the frameworks that has been put, whether it's the Oslo Accords or the two-state solutions or the new Abraham Accords and normalization. I think even the talks about peace comes without talking about the power and who has the power. It's about coexistence without dismantling apartheid. It's always just treating the Palestinian as a problem rather than just treating us as people that needs to be liberated and needs to get our full right. Basically punishing the colonized rather than just rewarding the colonizers for behaving well or behaving even okay. I think this is the main issue that we have.
Yeah. And do you think the issue is that we are dehumanized, or is there it's hard to for me as someone who's spent most of my life in I haven't had the privilege of living in Palestine like you and Musa, that I've been living among white folk here in Canberra for a lot of my life. And I thought they see me as a human being, and surely everyone seems to believe in equality. But then when it comes to this issue, suddenly people are scared to even talk. It's very, yeah, I don't know if you felt the same unsettling feeling.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And you feel humanized until you just announce that you're a Palestinian,
Yeah.
until it's clear, or you, as I said, it's just announcing that you're resisting the system or resisting the status quo that we've been put in, or asking for even your rights and the rights of your people and the rights to resist, to rally, to write stories about Palestine, to say that we exist as human beings. And this is exactly where you get the issue. As Musa said, it's very complicated. It's a problem that needs to be managed rather than a problem that needs to be resolved by giving the people their liberation. So yeah, totally agree with you, Tamara.
And to me, the fact that it's seen as so, or at least painted as something so complicated and something as just a problem to be managed, is not just because the West seems to give lip service to, every human being has equal worth, all lives matter, etc., etc. But also we have international law since the Second World War, and we're not asking for anything above international law. which is why, to me, the future of Palestine is intertwined with the future of international law. If the law is not applied consistently, then it's meaningless. Then it's just decoration and lip service for what politicians of the world want to do anyway. Mussa, you're a lawyer. What do you think of this? Is this a correct analysis, or what is your feeling?
I think I have to continuously remind people that I'm a commercial lawyer. Look, I think international law is lying in the rubble in Gaza with thousands of Palestinian men, women, and children. I think that's one thing that the world is coming to realise that. And you all remember what the chief prosecutor for the ICC said. He was told by someone high up that these laws were introduced for Africa and thugs like Putin, right? They're not for the West or its allies. I don't think international law wasn't really for us. I think the only way for us to cause any sort of change is for us to be able to catch up minds and hearts of people around the world, not through international law, but through advocacy, by having articulate, intelligent people able to communicate our message. Because when Australia came up with this, when we came up with this thing about the recognition, and there's a lot of stories about that, but one of the things I end up speaking about at the time, and a lot of people came up to me and said they were surprised that they actually, because nobody read that. They said they were going to recognise Palestine, but nobody read the fine print, so to speak, right? And so, and this is, I suppose, that's what lawyers are meant to do. But they said, here are the conditions under which we will recognise the state of Palestine. And the first one was de-radicalisation of the Palestinians. So the people who are occupied, those subjected to ethnic cleansing and currently genocide, are apparently the ones that need to be de-radicalised, and not the people committing those atrocities.
And the radicalization also seems to refer to our right to self-defense, because they see that if we have an armed resistance, that's radical. But Israelis are allowed to have an armed force. That's not, even though they're terrorists. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's the next, and that was the next. I mean, as it turns out, that was the next condition, right? There was this demilitarization, and so. And then it goes back to international law, because international law says we have a right to armed resistance when we're facing an occupation. Yeah. Well, apparently that applies, not to us. Apparently the Palestinians need to be demilitarized, but the nuclear state next door that's committing a genocide doesn't. And then it shifts back to the whole dehumanization thing, where it says, well, certain Palestinians aren't going to be involved in the future of Palestine. We're going to determine who it is that's going to be involved and who isn't, because again, we go back to so Hamas is not to be involved in this, right? Now, and by the way, why isn't any journalist out there talking to Hamas, right? I mean, because if we've determined that they're terrorists, right? Where they're designated as a terrorist organisation because Israel says they are, because the AIPAC says pushes the US to say that, and then we follow like sheep in Australia, right? But these are, I mean, the people involved in these negotiations are doctors and lawyers and academics. They're intelligent people, articulate people, and maybe we should be talking to them instead of. And I mean, I think it's generally malpractice to simply repeat the narrative of one group of people without speaking to the other, irrespective of how you feel about it. And apparently, because of the 7th of October, Hamas can't be involved in a future Palestine. But the Likud party and Netanyahu, who in their manifesto say that no state other than a Jewish state would ever exist between the river and the sea. That's their constitution. That's what and they apparently are going to be involved in some discussions about this so-called two-state solution, right? Despite openly declaring a genocide and then committing it, right? And openly saying that we would never allow such a state to exist. Apparently, they're involved in the conversation and the creation of this second state, but certain Palestinians aren't allowed to be involved in it. It's and those conditions basically tell you all you need to know about what the West's vision of Palestine is, and it's just a continuation of it starts with the dehumanization, and it concludes with a desire to continue the subjugation and colonization of our people.
Thank you, Mussa. Nahid, I'm interested in your thoughts about following on from that and about the question about the future of Palestine, if it's bound up with international law, or perhaps you think maybe even if international law. What are your thoughts about that question?
For sure. There's a wonderful article by Stephen Salaita where he basically talks about the frameworks of international law and humanitarianism, liberal ideals, democratic rights, as being something of an inconsistently applied paradigm, something that is used rather than to liberate the peoples outside of the West, something that's used actually as a sort of a framework that is not always fairly applied, to put it mildly, like something that is inconsistently applied and weaponized in order to further the goals of those who happen to hold the cards. And there is no better example of that than Israel. I think that the past 2 years especially, but really the past 77 years, have highlighted, I mean, even something so absurd as, like you said, Mussa, asking a genocided population to de-radicalize, and not the society which committed the genocide. When in history has this ever happened? Can we imagine that happening after Germany had committed its genocide, after Rwanda had committed its genocide? It's just something that is, we may have to look beyond that paradigm. We may need to look at other languages of liberation, other languages of people, oppressed people across the world who have won their rights and their liberation and autonomy over their resources, without this language, without these institutions. And but of course, I'm aware that there's a time and place for every type of language and every type of framework. I'm not totally against this idea of international norms and values being used to highlight, let's say, injustices that the world objectively, that the world considers to be like objective metrics. Like for example, if we're trying to assess what is a genocide, and we have a very plain and clear definition of what a genocide is, and that genocide can be applied to Palestine, that's actually very useful. So I'm not knocking on the language of international law, and I'm not saying that a world without international law would be better. But we just should be, as I'm sure we all are, conscious of the fact that rights only exist insofar as they're enforced. And in Israel's case, I have yet to see any accountability for their complete destruction, their complete mockery of international law that we've seen in Gaza.
Yeah. Tamara, can I just, before you get to questions proper in about 10 minutes, you mentioned people being too scared even to speak. Can I just throw at each of you the question about courage in public life? We see, particularly in politics, we seem to be so dominated by cowardice, politicians looking around to see which way the wind is blowing. And, the ancient philosophers said that courage was the cardinal virtue. Without it, you couldn't do anything. And yet, if we take, for example, the past 48 hours, another 100 Palestinians have been killed. And there's a deafening silence from Canberra, as far as I can make out. People are scared out of their wits to speak. Can each of you look at this question about the reassertion of some element of courage on this issue, to speak, if you like, to take the cliche, to speak truth to power? Because every time I've been to the federal parliament and to state parliaments, there's more cowardice than courage.
I'll throw to Lama to answer that first.
And I think this is the wall that we have been hitting for the past 2 years. It's exactly right, Stuart. It's the cowardness, and behind closed doors, you'll hear politicians feeling empathetic, giving us all of the lip services that a Palestinian may need, that we do understand, but in the fact, it's not there. It's cowardness, and I keep asking myself with the question of why the double standards and why the dehumanization, and we know that you understand, and we know that you understand it's a genocide, and it was clear there was an email leak from one of the Labour Party that has basically all of the statements that basically says that you understand the issue, you understand that it's a genocide, you understand that we're subjected to a genocide, you understand that the problem, us as Palestinians, needs to be resolved, and it needs to be resolved not basically by having the lip services of one state and two state and whatever states and recognition and condition. It needs to be by providing justice, and yes, it's cowardness. It's cowardness to make statements. It's cowardness to take to be on the right side of history, because that what will happen. People will be asked in few years about what have you done to stop what the destruction that has happened, what have you done to stop this genocide, and what you have done to stop all of the atrocities that happened in the, and I'm not going to say in the past 2 years, and I'm going to say rightly in the past 77 years.
I think that's so poignant. Nahid, what do you think about this question of courage?
I think it's extremely relevant here in Australia, where you'll often run into politicians telling you Australia is just a middle power. Australia doesn't have the cards to meaningfully change the tides on Israel or Palestine. However, I think if we're looking at the real metropole, if we're looking at Washington, D.C., we should be very wary not to confuse cowardice with intentional complicity. Because in practice, and here I'm judging by actions only, we can only conclude that the US's ultimate vision for Palestinians is the same as Israel, for there to be as few as possible, preferably none at all. Because as we all remember, during this genocide, which president explored offloading Gazans onto Egypt? Which president offered economic incentives to El-Sisi, who repeatedly refused? Well, it was the left president. It was President Biden as early as October 2023. It was the Biden administration that took the initiative for third country resettlement ideas, while Netanyahu's own ethnic cleansing plans were circulating at that same time. Trump's innovation was just to do this publicly. It would benefit Biden to be seen as a coward. It would benefit Trump to be seen as a coward. But I think in reality, all three of these administrations, I'm including Netanyahu here, have claimed that they oppose forcible displacement, but the concrete choices of Israel and the United States, from repeated UN vetoes that prolong a genocide that the entire world recognized, to emergency weapons deliveries and thousands of 2,000-pound bombs to Israel, to pausing UNRWA funding, which I was development manager of UNRWA USA at the time, and absolutely everybody knew that that would create a famine. Everyone knew that in DC, in Tel Aviv, and Canberra, and yet the decision was made to pause UNRWA funding. We should ask, are these the behaviors of countries that want to prevent mass displacement? I point this out not as a cynic, but as a realistic optimist, because all of this considered, it is a miracle that Palestinian people still exist in Gaza today. I do not believe that Trump's 20-point plan was the result of kindness. And I think over time, we're going to see more and more violations of the terms amenable to Palestinians. We're going to see more and more breaches of the ceasefire, which in any other context would already be considered broken. And we're going to see more of the outright exploitation and thefts, which the genocide of Gaza has made possible, both for Israel and the US and the Western allies in general. But the real genocide did begin in 1948, and the result is still pending.
It's so true. I think the point that perhaps with countries that might not be as staunch an ally to Israel as the US, maybe there is a case to be made of lack of courage. But when it's the US, like you say, it's more than that. It's an active feeding
Sure.
of the genocide.
Sure.
Mussa, what do you think about this question of courage?
Yeah, look, I agree with Nahid as far as those powers are concerned. It's not lack of courage. It's intentional complicity. There's no doubt in my mind about that. I think if I was going to talk about cowardice and lack of courage, I would probably designate more of that to us and to the media.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I think that's where it's really prevalent, because and Stuart's point about speaking truth to power, that's what the media is meant to do, and they have not done it. And I mean, the idea that 2 years on, right? 2 years on, every news report you hear, every news story you watch, everything you read will conclude by an Israeli denial. I mean, this is that the Israelis say, we're not going to allow journalists in, right? We then have Palestinian journalists, brave Palestinian journalists, 170 or 270 of them have been killed, who have been reporting and producing verifiable information about what's going on. And when we do every now and then air their stories, we then conclude them with Israel denies this. The average person listening to this walks away thinking, well, maybe they didn't do it. I mean, the idea that the media is still doing this 2 years on, I mean, surely it would get to a stage where you'd say to the Israelis, we're not going to repeat your talking points. Either let us in so we can report, or we're going to tell the stories that are verifiable that are coming out of Palestine. So I think the cowardice has been a lot more on the media. I think there's been a fair bit of cowardice at our end as well. The idea that we're so scared about talking about armed resistance really does my head in. The idea that and Stuart, you might recall in I think it was late Ali Kazak's last public thing we had at ANU. And when we spoke about the resistance movements of the past, and this goes back to a point that was raised earlier about history and how other oppressed people in the world have ended up dealing with that oppression. Let's remember the British negotiated with the IRA. The South Africa had to deal with the ANC. These are resistant movements, whether you like it or not. And yes, sure, every now and then there will be civilian. I mean, but it's there's every now and then crimes might be committed or civilians might be killed. But the idea that we're going to brush off or deny the Palestinians a right of armed resistance, right? It's just because remember, this designation as a terrorist organization for anybody is a political decision, right? It's not based on anything else. The fact that Hamas, for example, is designated as a terrorist organization in this and about half a dozen other countries, well, whilst the rest of the world serves citizens, tells you all you need to know. It's a political decision. And I think we need to stop being scared about our right under international law to armed resistance, irrespective of because today it's Hamas, and if Hamas was to disappear, remember it was a PLO one day, right? And then they were a terrorist organization until they weren't. The ANC was a terrorist organization until it wasn't. The IRA was a terrorist organization until it wasn't. So if they manage to destroy Hamas, the Palestinians have resisted for 77 years, and they will continue to resist. And the next group of Palestinian resistance fighters, who will be called something else, right, will also be designated a terrorist organization. So I think we need to have the courage to say we're entitled to this. If we commit crimes, then sure, investigate, prosecute us, right? But the idea that we're going to say we're going to deny the Palestinians a right to armed resistance just because a dozen countries around the world decide that they're going to designate us as terrorists, of course they're going to designate us as terrorists. Because that's what AIPAC says we should be, and therefore Europe, Australia, Canada, and Japan will say that we are. The rest of the world doesn't see it that way. So I think we should have the courage. So that's the courage at our end. I should just qualify that briefly with I'm not completely removed from the reality on the ground, and that is it is tough. It is tough for a lot of us to be able to speak out. Like I know Palestinians have lost their jobs. who've had to, I mean, the people still need. I mean, it's okay for me. I happen to run my own business. I'm not employed by anybody else. I don't rely on 2 or 3 big clients that I can still fit, and I can speak out, right? But I'm not without sympathy for those who find it difficult.
Sure. Yeah, I don't want to monopolize this, Tamara, but a lot of the cowardice occurs in relation to the management of universities. There's appalling cowardice across campuses by management, not by students, and they would lose nothing by having the courage to speak out, and even to say that they support universal human rights, but.
Well, it seems to be cowardice among almost all the major sectors of society. Cowardice among university leaders, cowardice among the media, among our political leaders, of course. I mean, so many pillars that democratic society rely on are suffering from a major disease of cowardice at the moment. You could call it a grand epidemic if you want. It's striking me from what everyone has been saying that on this panel, that the future of Palestine is bound up not just with how much we care to uphold international law, but also how courageous we can be. And if our leaders fail in their courage, then it's going to be falling on, and it has already been falling on, civil society to be courageous and to ask ourselves, what are we willing to sacrifice? Because it can also go the other way, even if you don't care much about Palestine. But the future of the world relies on us upholding international law and relies on the courage of our leaders for so many other things, not just for Palestine. So you can say, you can hold it whichever way around you want, future of Palestine or the future of courage and leadership and everything else. Lives and dies, perhaps with a cause this big, especially. Perhaps now is a good time to throw to the audience. And perhaps if you are in the audience and have a question, please raise your hand and I will call on you. I see that there are some questions in the chat. But feel free to raise your hand even if you have it in the chat so you can speak it out. Can people actually, maybe there aren't permissions for those in the audience to speak their question? Is that correct, Stuart?
So I think the questions are in the Q&A.
Yeah, so I have to pick out one from the chat. And
well, while you pick one out, if I may just, Stuart, just on that point about universities, I think that problem is a little bit more deeply entrenched, and I think it's caused by a slightly different problem in that the defunding of our universities for a significant period of time has left them in a space where they are actually reliant on outside assistance from corporations, and some of those corporations, and I've said this before, that if your physics degree is sponsored by a weapons manufacturer, then you can't go demonstrating against the genocide. If your natural resources department is sponsored by an oil company or something, then that is not then carrying on about climate change is not going to be appreciated. And it's the same people who make those decisions about funding that somehow end up back at the universities. The fact that here in Canberra, Bill Shorten is the vice chancellor at UC, and Julie Bishop is the chancellor at ANU is not an accident. I think it's a bigger and much deeper problem that exists in our education system.
Sure.
And there's nothing scares the state more than university students speaking out, because they're worried that this is the future that's coming, and hence the crackdown that occurred both here in the US on solidarity with Palestine.
Sure. But there's plenty of opportunity for people in my position. I mean, it didn't deter me all the time I was at the University of Sydney to say, look, you have to draw a line in the sand. We're not going to put up with bullying. We're not going to put up with intimidation. but I was probably a bit politically hard-nosed because I made sure I was a staff representative on the Senate, so I knew where the bodies were buried and where, and in some respects, where the money was. So and there's plenty of people in emeritus positions who have nothing to lose by saying to the universities, look, your cowardice is shameful. You can't just be, you're not meant to be a business corporation. And that you haven't referred exactly to neoliberal economics, but that's part of the disease. But then the churches, with a few exceptions, the leadership of Muslims is impressive, but otherwise, when I speak to Anglican leaders and Catholic leaders, they want 50 cents each way. They're not open in making a courageous stand about genocide. In fact, they're almost reluctant to use the word genocide. But I think that's enough from me. That Tamara, you're meant to be in charge, not me.
So I have a very good question in the chat from Silma Ahram, who says, given that we understand the huge obstacles that the Palestinian community has and continues to experience, can you start to paint a potential future that we can all champion? For example, is it possible for Israel to continue to exist if they are forced back from Gaza and the West Bank? Have they gone too far, and we should champion their complete removal as unsustainable after their crimes? What do you think, Lama?
I think Ghada al-Kermi said it really greatly in one of her podcasts, that there is no room for Zionism in a future state that includes both Jewish people and the indigenous Palestinians. There is no room for it. It's an ideology that needs to go, it's an ideology that goes completely against liberation. And I think it says it all. The future we've been talking about, and it's not how Israelis and Palestinians will get along or and stay in that same place. I think it begins with putting things right by giving Palestinians the right back, by ending the occupation, dismantling the apartheid system, and making sure that Palestinians can return to their homes and lands, and we can control our resources, we can be in our communities. And I think that idea is the only idea where justice can prevail. We're not talking about removing all of the Jewish people out of the Palestinian, but people who really believe in those principles, the principles of justice, the principle of it's not an occupier and occupied. We're all citizens with the same rights and responsibilities. Where this is exactly where we can get to wherever the future should be. If that answered the question.
Thank you, Lama. Thank you. What do you think, Nahid?
Yeah, full agreement with Lama there. Basically, if we're going to have a future, there has to be 6 recognizable features. And I can't script exactly how we get there, but those have to include 1, equal legal regime, which means equal citizenship, equal protection, equal vote, no separate systems of law. That's necessarily going to have a tension with the Zionist premise that there must be one state that grants particular rights to one people that are denied to another people. So already we're running into a tension there. But this might be the only way forward. Secondly, there has to be freedom of movement and family life. So that means, in practice, that means dismantling the architecture of permits, checkpoints and walls that fragment our communities. Thirdly, there has to be return, restitution, and compensation handled by an independent mechanism so that families can go home. Fifth, there has to be security as a shared goal, not as a zero-sum project. So there has to be a demilitarization of civilian life while protecting all communities from violence. And I can't stress this enough. There can't be a Palestinian state that is only militarized against its own people. Sixth, there must be a rights-anchored constitution. That can be secular, it can be binational. All that matters is that it guarantees equality regardless of ethnicity or faith. Does that look like one state or two state? Well, on political form, the map drawn by decades of settlement expansion has already shredded the territory that a two-state partition would require. It also bears mentioning that last year there was a vote in the Knesset, kind of a declarative vote, where every single MP on the question of whether there should be a Palestinian state voted no. Every single Zionist MP voted no to a Palestinian state. And, what more can I say? It doesn't seem that the same people would be interested in one state either, but it just demonstrates that if we're going to talk about what's feasible, what's possible, it feels as if both futures are impossible, so we might as well start from what's right. And those 6 things are what's right. We need an equal legal regime, we need freedom of movement, we need return, we need security, and we need a rights-anchored constitution. And if we start by ending the occupation and restoring Palestinian agency, the best institutional shape will follow from that freedom. It will not precede it.
Thank you, Nahid. Thank you, Nahid. Mussa, what are your thoughts on this question?
Look, I agree with what Nahid has said, but I think, and then sort of more towards the question that was being asked. The reality is such as whatever happens would have to include the end to the apartheid, and that means the end to Zionism. And just quickly, because I know you've got a lot of questions, there was a couple of surveys recently where 47% of Israelis supported the genocide, and the question wasn't, do you support genocide? Because then people will say, what's the definition of a genocide, etc. But they were actually asked, if we enter a city, should we kill everyone that's in there? And 47% of Israelis said yes. There was that same survey, there was a question about whether the question was, are there any innocent people in Gaza? And 66% said there aren't any, right? Those people are not going to be part of a future state. And I suspect that they will use their second passport to depart to another country because they don't see Palestinians as human, as equals, and therefore will refuse to be part of such a state. So whatever that state is, I suspect a significant portion of the people who are there can't remain there because it would no longer suit their ideology of apartheid and inequality. Sorry.
Well, Israel is a spare state for, probably, I don't know what proportion of Israelis, but they would have dual citizenship in a lot of countries because they're very recent colonizers, right?
The idea, and that's the thing. The Palestinians, on the other hand, didn't come from anywhere else.
Yeah.
Can't go anywhere else.
Exactly.
You're not going to force them to leave. They were born there, they remain there, and they will continue to be there. And we're not going to be ethnically cleansed. It's not going to happen. They've tried it for 77 years. They've tried it through every means possible. And they haven't succeeded, and they won't. So the reality is the Palestinians aren't going anywhere. And anyone who is willing to live as an equal in that state can't live as equal. If you see yourself as being superior to the other human beings in that place, then you'd have to go elsewhere. And this spare state thing is because apparently Europe can't help themselves and may commit, or the United. Apparently Jewish people can't feel safe anywhere else in the world. Right now, all of a sudden, that's somehow the Palestinians' problem. I mean, surely that's on Europe that committed a genocide against the Jewish people. To be able to protect them, to allow them to live there safely. I mean, this idea that Jewish people can't need the state of Israel must exist because it provides a safe haven for Jewish people, that's on the rest of the world. It's not on us.
Yeah, for sure. There is another question which I think is very pertinent. What's your vision for the leadership of Palestine and the boundaries, and how could they be achieved? Nahid, I'll start with you this time.
I think it's up to the Palestinians. And I think right now And when I say the Palestinians, I especially emphasize those that are within Palestine, not just those like me who are, privileged enough um, to dream of a future, to have the internet access and the, things that have been robbed of basically half of the population of the people living in Palestine right now in tents and over rubble. There needs to be a framework that allows Palestinians to choose their own leaders. And yeah, that's my answer.
Thank you, Nahid. Lama, what do you think?
Again, I think we need to take back our agency. We need to build the power that shapes our destiny from our own people, from the grassroots, from the workers, from the leaders on the ground, from the people on the ground, and from the different parts of the Palestinian community. It has to come from us. It has to not imposed on us by donors, not imposed to us by elites in Palestine. It has to come from people on the ground, and we have to take ownership of our political narrative, reforming it and building it even from scratch, and based on whatever we have agreed in terms of our thawabit, in terms of our red lines as Palestinians, and in terms what we inspire as Palestinians to be the future of Palestine. And it has to come from us again. I do agree with you, Nahid, that it should be from people in Palestine, people on the ground, but we're part of it. And regardless that we live in exile, we live in the privileged world, but we are also part of the whole Palestinian story. We live in exile because we were forced to live in exile. And I think it should be everybody, every Palestinian, whether in the refugees camps in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, us in exile, we need to use all of the minds, all of the power and everything to rebuild Palestine.
Yes, it's a revolutionary idea, isn't it? That perhaps the leadership of Palestinians should be decided by Palestinians through a democratic vote. Oh my goodness, I wonder what other countries do that.
Surprise!
Shocking revolutionary thought. It's like if we asked Australians, what do you think your leadership should be? They'd be like, well, maybe we should decide it at the ballot box. Well, Mussa, I'd like to see what your thoughts are about the original question, leadership and borders. Sorry, you're on mute.
I want waste. It's the same point that Matt raised at the beginning, right? This idea that this is somehow complicated. It's not complicated.
Yeah.
Palestinians and I agree with that. Palestinians who are in Palestine choose whoever they want to lead. That they want to lead them. Why are we different to anyone else? That's all I'm saying.
Tamara, at this point, I've got to be a terrible imposer of rules because I'm only being paid handsomely if I'm a good.
I think we finished right on time.
I'm a good timekeeper. I just want to say thank you to all four of you. In some ways, I wish we were not on a webinar. I wish we were face to face somewhere and could retreat for at least an hour or more over coffee. But thank you so much. You can stay on screen at least if you want to watch the next session. And so I'll take a deep breath. I can see that my colleague Paul Haywood-Smith is here. Paul is going to conduct the next session, which is about the media and the law's response to the dilemmas of reporting on a genocide. I think I put the word dilemmas in there. I'm not sure what dilemma there really is. Paul has been a very distinguished contributor to Pearls and Irritations. You can almost rely on Paul weekly to remind us of what the small print of international law actually says. More important than that, in my view, is his support for the former Labour MP Melissa Park when Paul obtained a very significant judgment on behalf of Melissa against the, let me just in general say, against the Zionist concern that they are always right and must persecute anybody who is slightly critical of Israel. So I give my colleague Paul Hayward-Smith a gold medal for that. And Paul has also been one of the key movers and shakers, I think, in the early days of the creation of a faux pas. And Paul will maybe nod if I'm correct in that respect. So I got a nod. That really, your nod, Paul, is the cue to introduce the pretty distinguished panel that you have at your disposal.
Well, Stuart, my running sheet says that there's a quarter of an hour.
Oh, okay. Well,
gap between.
Okay. Well, I've failed. The handsome pay that I'm not receiving will have to be subtracted. Do you have your panel members? I can see you've got you've got Mary and Greg available, or not? Or Antoon is there? I can see.
I can't see them here yet, but they don't have to be here for another 10 minutes.
Okay. Well, let me. I mean, I've got to give a summary at the end of this morning, and I basically need to steal ideas from Tamara and her three colleagues on the panel. I think there's a sense of what comes through to me is the sense of utter incredulity that leaders in public life, politicians, leaders of churches, leaders in universities, leaders in the media, don't have the guts to talk about the ideals of a common humanity, because that's all that's required. This appeal to treat Palestinians as human beings, this cowardice to talk about the last century of abuse, not the last few decades, but a whole century in which the public has been completely deceived about the colonization of Palestine. And I'm, in a way, I'm looking right at Nahed at the moment, because it's your generation. I think, luckily, you're a lot younger than me. I mean, I think your generation has got to pick up at least talk truthfully about what the history of the last 100 years has said. And in a way, although you're on mute, I'm chucking that as a question at you, and you can go off mute if you like. What's your generation going to do about it, Nahed?
What we have to do is we have to really be open to a break from the past 77 years. Look, the future of Palestine, right? That's the name of the seminar. But it was also the name of a memorandum circulated by the British cabinet 110 years ago, okay? And what that was a memorandum by Herbert Samuel, who was a Liberal Party leader. And this was his vision for the future of Palestine. Let's annex Palestine and turn this 14% Jewish territory into a Jewish state. And he wanted to do this to sort of civilize the backwards countries. So what was considered so radical 115 years ago is the reality today. So today, 500 emptied villages and towns later, decades of massacres and expulsions later, that's the future for Palestine that we are living in. And I point all of this out to say that if something so unthinkable a few generations ago, so radical as the destruction of an entire society to create a colonial ethno-state is possible, then what makes reversing that project any more radical? What makes a return to how Palestine was for centuries any more unthinkable? Because the fact is that Zionism definitionally was the end of Palestine. So there can be really no future for Palestine, no future for coexistence without the reversal of Zionism and its assumptions. So my generation has to be very open to the idea that that kind of de-radicalization, real de-radicalization, the ending this premise that Palestinians are second-class humans, both in Israel and in many of the halls of power here in Australia and in the US, it may take 10 years for that to be reversed. It may take 50, may take another 110, but that may be the only future worth turning to.
In an earlier observation, Tamara, and you can perhaps switch off, you can get back off mute again. You made a link between you didn't refer exactly to Sudan and Myanmar and Ukraine, or even to domestic violence around the globe. But by implication, at least, you're saying, look, this is an issue about the abusive uses of power, disproportionately by men who only, whether they're in uniform or not, you can see the savagery that's going on in the Sudan at the moment. And you know, I've explored a bit about the mindset of those two dreadful generals in the Sudan. It's no different from when I've interviewed men who are guilty of domestic violence in this country and in European countries. They can't think of any other way to behave. And when you listen to Netanyahu and the religious zealots in his cabinet, it's the same thing. But when I hear people in universities talking about need for more discipline, they mean more control. It's a kind of illiteracy about the uses of power. And massive populism is only, you know, about the spread of I think you called it an epidemic, the abusive uses of power. And it's got nothing to do with enhancing life. It's only about destroying life. You only have to watch the dreadful pictures every night about the Russian assault on Ukraine.
Yeah, I think it's very telling that I like that you've made the link with domestic violence and the power hungry and the sadistic violence that we're seeing in all these places, not just Palestine. But the thing that really gets me, and I heard a talk by Omar al-Akkad last weekend, and I share his frustration. I'm of course super angry with the people who are abusing the power, like Israel itself. But I'm not surprised by how they've behaved. Like this has been a part of Israel's modus operandi since even before 1948. What I have been probably naively shocked about is the behavior of Australia, countries like Australia, that say one thing, but then do another. And all we're really saying is have the courage to put your money where your mouth is. You say you abide by all these principles, Western principles of equality and democracy, and blah, 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 and human rights for all. But then when it comes to actual actions, you do the complete opposite. It's, it could be a lack of courage, or as Nat had said earlier, it could be that they actually have an interest in actively participating in genocide. But then that's I guess one of the few reasons why I actually like Trump, is that he does what he says on the tin. He doesn't pretend, he doesn't care about window dressing. And maybe that's the only difference that separates countries like the US and Australia. Maybe that's the only difference that separates Labor from Liberal or Republicans from Democrats, is they're all essentially doing the same or similar things on the ground, but one takes the trouble to window dress and the other doesn't.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. Yeah, that was first rate. I do wish we could retreat somewhere for coffee, but that another day.